Hello, and welcome to our next presentation. This is day 3 of the final day of the symposium. And on behalf of the MIT CDOIQ Virtual Symposium, we would like to thank all our sponsors who have sponsored the symposium this year. Please keep a lookout for a very special survey that we'll be sending out shortly. In the meantime, let me thank our sponsors, Deloitte Informatica, Privacy Analytics, DAWIX, Fusion Alliance, KPMG, Santel Consultants, Tamer, Elation, Ali Data, Big ID, Boomi, Caserta, Citizen, Data Kitchen, Garage, Okira, Palog, Click, ThoughtSpot, Eckerson, Global ID, Snowflake, and Starburst. Please take a chance to go to Content Hub, see what content they have, download that, and if you get a chance, reach out to our partners. Without our partners, we would not be able to hold a symposium. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you in 2021.
All right, this is Peter Anlian, facilitator for the Track A. We're going to toss it right to Robert Abate, who has put together this panel. What does it mean to be a data-driven company? And that's why we're all here at the symposium, isn't it? Robert, over to you.
Hello, and thank you. I'm honored and privileged to be a co-chair to this conference, and feel that it's a tremendous opportunity to share information with other CDOs and team members. And I'm very blessed and fortunate to have built or collected a panel and assembled this panel with over 125 years of experience combined. Rather than further ado, I think it's important that we get right to it. I'm going to open up the what does it mean to be a data-driven company with a brief introduction. Traditionally, businesses utilize their resources, their occupational instincts, and their business intelligence, which we all know is past history, in order to understand performance. As data becomes more prolific, organizations are challenged with managing, governing, and ethically utilizing data, along with advanced analytics and AI machine learning to lead their organizations and drive business decisions. This panel is going to examine the challenges and opportunities for a chief data officer to steer their business colleagues to becoming a data-driven organization. And with that, I'm going to move to the next slide, which kind of is a little joke. In fact, I wanted to...
I'm sorry, Robert, we're not seeing the slides. Can you share your screen, please?
Oh, sorry about that. Let me see why we're not seeing the slides. Share screen, share. Okay, can you see them now?
Perfect.
Okay, good. I thought I'd start out actually with a little humor, and that we're all virtual. It's kind of interesting, and I just had a very funny thing happen. I was wearing a blue shirt and the blue background that I'm on, and what happened was it actually made me look like I was a person with a tie. So I had to change shirt, but at least I get to wear my these are my fun swim trunks because I'm in Florida. So at any rate, let's move along. One of the areas we're going to be talking about, we're going to introduce the panels very quickly. We're going to move along to some questions that were predetermined, along with an open question and answer period, and we'll review the questions side by side. I'd like to introduce and have each person introduce themselves. First on the panel, Andrea Gibbons. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Good morning. I'm Andrea Gibbons. I'm the Deputy Data Officer for Export Bank of the U.S. I'm responsible for maturing our data management practices and aligning to federal data strategy. And I've spent the last 20+ years working on enterprise data management, maturation of the practices on all different kinds of companies and federal and state agencies.
Great. Now, Asif, maybe you can introduce yourself.
Good morning. This is Asif Syed. I work at Hartford Steam Boiler. I lead their data strategy team. I'm also the business lead for a large enterprise information management program. It's a data and analytics transformation program. And before joining HSB, I worked few other companies. I worked at Excel Catlin. Now it's Excel, AXA Excel, the Hartford, and a few other carriers. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Martha, maybe you could introduce yourself?
Hi, and thank you for having us here this morning. I have been in data management for over 30 years and semi-retired about 3 years ago. So I still do some light consulting in the industry, but I'm here this morning, as having been invited by Robert, and I'll turn it over to Milind.
Milind, it's your turn.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you, Robert. Again, also delighted to be here. I'm technically a geneticist. I've had a chance working in an incredible amount of data when I worked on the Human Genome Project very early on in my career. And since then, I've really focused at the intersection of technology, health, and life sciences and the development of medicines that create impact. I've had a career that spawned startup companies working for Apple executives, all the way through to working in large pharma, where my most recent deployment was as the first enterprise chief data officer in the life sciences industry. I've since gone back to my roots, if you will, in startup and biology, 20 years literally since the Human Genome Project was announced, to discover a new path in biology and how we understand biology today at Cellarity, which is a flagship pioneering company. If you don't know flagship, I'm pretty sure most of you have heard of Moderna. Cellarity is founded by the same people who built Moderna from ground up as well to discover this new paradigm shift. I'm very excited to be here, but as you can imagine, have seen a lot of different flavors and versions of chief data officers and data initiatives through the course of the career.
Well, thank you. It's I feel grateful and thrilled to be a part of a team that's speaking to the topic of what does it mean to be data-driven. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to the next slide. What we're doing, every 10 minutes, we're going to ask a question of the audience. This way we can kind of get a feel and we can all learn from each other about what is going on. So here you're going to see the first question that's going to be asked of the attendees. How many attendees feel they are part of a data-driven organization? Yes or no? So every 10 minutes, if I can remember it, please remind me, we'll jump off and we'll look at the results of those questions. And without further ado, so these questions will be going on in the background. Let's head directly into the first part of the panel, which is data-driven corporations drive decision-making and react to disruptors. So I want to introduce, Martha Dember to start this conversation of evidence-based decision-making.
Yes, in the very early years when they talked about data-driven, it was more around companies that were trying to find ways to monetize their data, right? Actually figuring out what they could learn from the data and then sell that information. But as more and more organizations really began to look at their data and listen to what the data was telling them, they learn to actually use the data and what they're learning from the data to drive their decisions and make decisions much more rapidly based on the data that they were receiving in versus the old way of relying on experience, right? So, because the oscillation curve has been changing, it's become much shorter in its curves, and its peaks and valleys have become much more deeper because of the information age and the way that people respond to the information that they get from their friends or from media or different types of inputs that are coming at them. They change their behaviors much more rapidly. And also organizations are learning that it's not just competitiveness in an industry anymore, but if they can become a disruptor to actually change, what people want in a specific industry, that is very profitable to them as well. So if they can get all the information in very quickly about what people's needs and wants and desires are, they can actually be a disruptor in the industry that they're in. So data is having a huge impact if organizations that are becoming data-driven are actually using data to figure out what their drivers should be moving forward.
Robert, I think you're muted.
Unmute. Sorry about that, guys. I go on mute because my background's a little noisy. That was a great answer, Martha. Martha, in her introduction, really didn't describe that she was more or less one of the founders to data governance, and actually is a DAMA fellow. So tremendous guidance coming from an expert in the field and a true industry thought leader. Andrea, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this question.
Yeah, well, I of course, I agree with Mark. My experience is a little bit different, especially now that I'm government. So they introduced what they call the Data Act, and it's an evidence-based act, and it talks about how you manage and align your data in order to make better and faster decisions. I think that we've seen both in the government as well as in businesses that data is a byproduct, or has been a byproduct of transactional systems, instead of designing your applications and your technology about what data is needed for a business to make business decisions and react or unleash the power of the data. So I think that that's really what people are looking at now, is how do you realign your applications and your systems to really get data in the hands of the decision makers that can react quickly, rather than having all your data having to be dumped somewhere and then massaged and arranged for better analytics to make a decision, a week or 2 weeks or a month or a year later. So that's really what we're seeing.
That was a great answer. We're going to move on to question number 2, which is alignment of business and data strategy. And the role of the CDO, we all know, is somewhat of a fluid mechanism. Some CDOs report into CIOs, some CDOs report lower, some CDOs report directly to CEOs. So each role has with it a different challenge. But the alignment, where the digital operating model, how the digital data, the assets, and the analytics are really what we see as the role of the CDO in the higher level. I'm going to start with Asif. Asif, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so Robert, we're in our organization at HSB, our data strategy always starts with our business strategy. It's derived from, because it's always aligned and derived from the business strategies and the business priorities that the companies are working on. It's also aligned with a lot of other priorities in the organization, like what are the other technology strategy going on, the digital strategy, analytics strategy. So it's all aligned, and it kind of comes together. What we have done, we have started like 4 years back. We have started a large, transformation program for the data and analytics to align, come up with the strategy. And we have it like a both short-term strategy and as well as a long-term strategy, because there are some priorities that business really want today, the data that they need to solve some of the business problems. They can't wait for our long-term data strategy to fulfill. But while we are building the long-term data strategy, a foundation for it, what we call a data factory, but it's really use case driven, because we really don't do any data project here without a solid use case. But we also have other initiatives going on as such, like both for internal data and external data, because those are all holistic in nature. We look a lot of external third-party data to augment our internal data. So that's the strategy as well, because what data you buy, what data you kind of procure, what data is available, because in the insurance industry, as you know, like data was always the core of the insurance business. We have been doing the actuaries were using data for last, as long as the insurance company existed. But the amount of data, the varieties of data, that is available today, it's completely different. And it really needs to align with what the business priorities are.
Sure. Milind, I know you've got some thoughts on that.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more with Asif, right? I think it also depends on the nature of the company. You know, when you look at companies like Stitch Fix that are more digital native companies, or even Netflix, the role of the CDO is in fact the business. Without the data, they wouldn't be able to conduct work. And this is a very interesting model. I would encourage listeners to look at Eric Colson, who's the CDO of Stitch Fix, who formerly was the CDO of Netflix. Look at the blog that they've been putting together to get some more modern approaches of how they're approaching this and really monetizing information assets. You have other companies that I would say are more sort of established incumbents in industry, or who in fact have defined industry, where they're facing a different kind of transformation today. And I would argue, irrespective of what the industry is, we're seeing three basic formats of value creation when we come to business and data strategy coming together. That is, every company today needs to evolve with a digital operating model. It's the way you do work. Number two, the data that gets created in many ways is in fact the asset. And the analytics and the predictions that are generated as a result for more relevant decision-making become tools in the narrative of value creation for these companies. And so when you think about the role of the CDO, I think it's no longer acceptable for CDOs to just think about technology or to just think about partners and things like that, but really to be laser focused on how are you creating value utilizing the operating model of digital where it's relevant, the value of fast access to data and relevant access to data. And then, of course, the opportunity to integrate that with better methods that we now have access to understand and build the narratives around the data for. And I think when you combine all of those, you're seeing this opportunity for the CDO to build out the semantics of what it means to be a data-driven company.
Robert, you're muted again.
I'm muted again. I just saw that. I hit the button and it doesn't react fast enough. What are these computers? Brilliant answer. The next question we had planned was something about FAIR. It's kind of interesting. FAIR is an acronym. Stands for findability, accountability. Findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability. It was actually recently came out. In fact, I went back and did a little research on FAIR itself and found that it was first published in March of 2016 in the European Union regarding guiding principles in a scientific journal. And that journal was trying to come up with an easy way to describe the interaction of data within an organization. Obviously, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable are four key components as we look farther and farther into data. What I wanted to do, and I'm going to pass it over to Milind to get a little deeper into this, but before I do, I'm just going to jump for a second over to the conversation. We had asked the question, what are the CEOs spending most of their time on? Looks like most is data management and partial is change management. So the questions will keep changing every 10 minutes. The previous question, I'm sorry, I didn't get it up in time. I waited a little too long. So we're going to keep hitting these questions. It'll give us an interesting idea of the participants on this, and to your questions, we'll be able to have some insight. So Milind, I'm going to go back to you to talk about FAIR a little bit. I know that you being in the scientific community was a part of that, so maybe you can expand on it.
Of course, yeah. I mean, look, to me, I think this is probably one of the most critical functions of a CDO to enable and frankly, power and lead their organization in terms of being a more data-driven business. I would argue being a data-driven business is simply business. The information assets, as we talked about, are critical. But when it comes to FAIR, I found that this was one of the most relevant ways CDOs can actually build up business cases for initiatives that are often viewed as back office functions. For example, I can't recall the last time anyone was given a pat on the back for building a great data lake, let alone a database. But I do recall that whenever the database or accessibility to data was down, the amount of yelling one would hear as a result of that. And I think this is one of those things that's really important when you think as a CDO running your business in the context of the larger construct. Your first answer is often, can people even find the data? I think we can all agree that many enterprise businesses today have significant issues with silos, and business silos, which then lead to multiples of data repetition and lack of interoperability, accessibility. In fact, I recall fondly when I was at Sanofi, which was my last company as CDO, when presenting to the board over there, when they asked, look, Milind, if you can just figure out F, you would have solved 90% of our business problems. Which is quite surprising for someone like me saying, well, hang on, isn't your entire business running on information, biological information, commercial information, and other such opportunities around the healthcare? And so I think, you know, when you think about FAIR, these are ones where you could actually drive economic tangents to strengthen your business case in the initiatives and projects that you're working on. So findable data, you could attribute master data management very well to findable data. You can attribute security and data privacy to findable issues. When you think about accessibility, again, you know, security roles and responsibilities and ownership, ensuring that data stewardship is incentivized appropriately for accessibility. It also enables you, should you be in a highly regulated business, to ensure that accessibility is happening at the right discretionary level based on rules and governing principles that are appropriate. Interoperability is probably one of the hardest ones to resolve because it involves both integration efforts as well as the opportunity to creating relevance across data sources. So even if you're deploying things like knowledge graphs into your system as a way of connecting data sources together, you still want to do this in a meaningful way. But one of the major advantages coming from interoperability is when done right, it allows you to develop a semantic model under which your data initiatives are constructed in ways in which you can actually build, if you will, an interoperable language with your business as well. And reusable, I think we can all appreciate this, which I'm not convinced that we all do necessarily well, which is the notion of, look, we've generated great data and now we've got shelfware as a result. How do we ensure that reusable data or data that is produced once can actually be exploited to its full potential value? In the context of the life sciences industry, clinical trial data, for example, is a wonderful reason for reusable data. And in fact, if you look at all of the initiatives going on from people who've never been in healthcare industry as well around COVID-19 and so forth, you've seen a lot of reusable data that has come to bear to help discover potentially new impacts of drug possibilities during this crisis that we're facing. So I think as a business, adopting these into your business case is a very strong proposition for CDOs to actually bridge the gap between people understanding what it is you actually do and the value you bring to the table.
And we heard actually in the keynote a discussion about the actual integration of data with this COVID virus. So let's just for a second take a look to see if we've changed the question. Where are CDOs spending most of their time? Data management, change management, analytics has now popped up. That's good. So we'll now switch this question to the next question. We're going to go back to the PowerPoint. Now, we thought the fourth question to share before we go into open questions was the industry disruptors. How has that changed the role of a chief data officer? Industry disruptors are technologies that have come about in the last couple of years that we're all deeply now familiar with: machine learning, deep learning, artificial intelligence from the perspective of very specific artificial intelligence, not generalized, and other disruptors that have come about. And I want to pass this along to, let's see, why don't we start with Andrea? Andrea, what do you think these disruptors have done to the role of the chief data officer?
Well, for me, I think it just it really helps to get across to our business and also our leadership about how important data is, especially as a lot of the tools are so much more accessible to the end user. They don't need IT as much in order to start to use data to drive visualizations. And I think that we've seen that it really underpins the importance of having good data management principles, methods, and methodologies. Because I'm sure we've all been there where somebody creates a dashboard and goes and presents it and starts to make business decisions, and you can take a look at it as a data professional and realize that something's amiss. Either data is correlated incorrectly, or that if you just did a quick data profile, you would see that the data quality is poor. So I think that's really because people understand more readily about why it's important to care and feed for our data on a daily basis.
Very, very true. Asif, I want you to add your thoughts in here.
Yeah, no, that's kind of a, as you know, in the insurance industry, there are a lot of disruption happening. If you're following, the Lemonade experience, Lemonade went public a few months back, and they are the kind of, that kind of disrupted some of those in the P&C sector. And in our industry, in our equipment business, we are also trying to disrupt ourselves by, IoT, ingesting IoT into our machinery and equipment insurance industry. And so there are a lot of data getting generated on a daily basis, not just from our traditional the insurance data sources, but also all this IoT data that is getting, generating, the lots of data in our industry, So those data are becoming central to all the decisions that we are making in the company. So data became very central to the, organizational culture. And that, I believe, that's kind of the thing that changed in the last few years.
Very, very true. Martha, did you want to add anything to that?
I think in my perspective, I think there's been some confusion between machine learning and artificial intelligence and the terms being used interchangeably. I think there are differences in those. I think machine learning is much more pervasive right now that it's happening versus true artificial intelligence. And I'd like to hear a little bit more from Asif or Milind on their aspects or their take on that.
Milind? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the machine learning and artificial, we are doing a lot of work in that field. We have lots of data scientists building a lot of predictive models. Insurance companies were building loss models, the insurance pricing models forever. But the things that have changed is the pervasive nature of AI and the machine learning in the insurance industry. But what we are doing a little different is actually deploying those machine learning models in a practical scenario. We are building an API first, structure and architecture that we are deploying the machine learning models in real time through the CI/CD pipeline, and all those models are in the cloud and it's becoming accessible to the customer. So using the machine learning models and other analytics solution, in real time, it's really game changer, for our industry.
Yeah, I would add to that, Asif, in the life sciences industry, it's quite fascinating. I mean, when I think about, from late 99, 2000, when the Genome Project came around, we sort of went through, if you will, this transformation of industry and roles, where bioinformatics came around, then computational biology came around, then statistical genetics came around, data mining came around, and now data scientists came around, now machine learning scientists and AI specialists came around. And I think what you've seen in all of those is one common thread, and that is being able to fit the right curve to appropriate data. And that's fundamentally what machine learning is doing across this board. Personally, at Cellarity, we're doing a lot of this work as well. I mean, our entire business is based on the predictive nature of biology, which in and of itself is quite humbling because you realize biology can very quickly tell you how stupid you are in some of the assumptions you make. But at the same time, it allows for exploration and curiosity that previously has not been done. And what I see in the context of drug development, amazing people joining this fight, if you will. I think about my friend Daphne Koller at Coursera, or former founder of Coursera, and the work that she's doing at Encitro, where they're building significantly better models, applying computer vision in high dimensional data for cell images and cells that have been changed under the relationship of a drug. And when you think about these sorts of things, you see that machine learning, to me, deep learning, are just much better methods than perhaps what we had in the past, using more traditional statistical-based approaches. But they also require context in the work that we do. I think just randomly, to Martha's point, randomly using the word MLAI in everything we do is actually doing a disservice to the industry. I think it's important that we start educating the industry specifically on what we mean, what the algorithms mean, whether it's a linear regression or is it truly a symbolic approach to doing analysis, or things like that. Now, whilst most business users wouldn't care about the approach, what they do care about is the cost that goes into it. Some of you may be familiar that we've had a major breakthrough in natural language processing in the last 2 or 3 weeks with GPT-3 and also with BERT that was released by Google. When you look at those two initiatives alone, the OpenAI community for developing GPT-3 required almost $6 million of investment in data to build up those training models. Google, on the other hand, in a comparative nature, needed only $6,000. So it begs to question that whilst we're advancing, we cannot underestimate the resource allocation that goes into these. And simply sprouting MLAI as one sentence or one word is frankly causing more disillusion in the industry in terms of its true utility and value creation.
Yeah, I have to agree with the panel here. Having implemented the machine learning at both Kimberly-Clark and some in Walmart, I always found that the challenge was the training data, getting the right information into the learning module so that it could actually learn from itself and provide value. But these disruptive technologies, I found, have given the CDO a new tool in the toolkit that allows them to go out then and show the advantages, for example, of data learning using some of these new tools. And I'm going to just bounce over and see how we're doing on the questions. How many organizations have had a quality chief data officer for more than 2 years? Looks like most are in the 0 to 25% range, with 13% in the 50 to 75% range and 0 in the 75 to 100% range. This is something the panel actually predicted, that chief data officers tend to be moving, and that because of the fluidity of the position, that's what's going on. So I'm going to go back now for a second. We can even change that question. We're now going to open it up to the floor to open for questions. I want to make sure we have the ability to answer all these questions. Let's see here. Let's see if we could go to some questions. Maybe we could have that moderated by the MIT team.
Hi, Robert. I'll go ahead and start listing off some questions here for you. So number 1, do you have a central team that brings your data into the data lake?
Asif, why don't you start then?
Yeah, we are actually doing a large transformation program on that. We have, our CDO calls like it's jet engine strategy. We have a, ingestion, data ingestion plan, data integration plan, and the data consumption plan are all we are building in the cloud. So yes, we do have a central team, and we are building a large foundation. While we are building the foundation, of course, we are incrementally giving value to the business, because remember, a lot of data lake projects or the cloud data warehouse project failed in the past because the incremental value to the business was never there. It was like, we'll deliver after 5 years, and business would never wait for 5 years to give you the value. So what we are doing, we have a central team, we are building the foundation, but as we're building the foundation, we're also incrementally giving value to the critical business area that they need it today. So that's how we are kind of thriving in that activity.
Great. Next question. What are the panelists' views on the role of the intentional data literacy program for fostering healthy collaboration, curiosity, and self-sufficiency?
Well, I know that Martha's going to have input on that one, and I'm pretty sure that Andrea is as well. Martha, you want to start?
Yeah, data literacy. That is a huge thing, I believe. For years in data governance programs, we've talked about building out business glossaries to get the proper definition of data and ensuring that everybody in the business was using terms correctly. But even across consultants within the industry, we don't talk about terms identically, right? We have our own definitions for the data store, right? So data literacy and the ambiguities in data in the way we use terminology still is very pervasive. And it is actually something I'm working with currently in an organization to really get the business to understand what terms mean and what do we mean by a data lake even, So I hear a lot of people misuse ODS and data warehouse as being the same thing. So I think this is a huge aspect that we need to really address more consciously and more deeply to really understand data literacy and get terminology more, less ambiguous, I guess is the way to put it. And
yeah, I would.
Go ahead.
Please.
Oh, sorry, Martha. I thought you were finished. I was going to say I agree with everything that Martha said, and that data warehouse, ODS, data mart confusion drives me nuts on a daily basis. The way that people talk about things. But yeah, and the part of the federal data strategy that they released as part of the Data Act for the federal government is to measure your data literacy for your staff, so that you can have some sort of focus how to mature data management and really to build out the data skill sets for all staff. And just in about a week, releasing my whole agency a questionnaire that talks about questions about data literacy. We're going beyond just the glossary and the business terms that are required, but also to look at how people can use data, and if they know how to interpret visualization, and do they know how to correlate data? Do you know that to co-data, especially in the federal space, so people don't commingle data and make data that should be secured differently. So I think it's a good focus for people to have. It's a really hard, I guess it's hard to kind of sell, and we have some people that were offended by calling it data literacy. So we're thinking about changing it and talking about it as data acumen, just to kind of soften it. So that's really where we are. I think it's important, and it is that's part of that real culture change that needs to happen along for data governance, data literacy, data maturation at a fundamental level for an organization to truly be data driven and efficient at it.
Yeah, I think you brought up some really good points there, and the understanding of the data and how it can be used is really critical. So if you can get people to really understand the term and to not talk in generics, so you don't just talk about a plan, but you talk about a specific type of plan and you call it that, so that everybody's always on the same page and they really begin to understand that there could be many different types of plans, and you got to make sure that you're addressing the appropriate one within the data to make sure you're using data properly. It all fits together. It's all pieces of the puzzle to really get good data usage and the reusability of data, as we were talking about earlier.
Right. We have another question here. Do you plan to open up your data to external companies? Who'd like to answer that one? Maybe Milind. I know you're working with molecular biology and some other areas. Go ahead.
I mean, the short answer for me is no. Right now, we're building very proprietary data models and generating our own data sets at this point in time, which are core IP of the company. So at this point, no, unless it's part of a strategic relationship. The answer is no.
That makes sense. Another question, how does the CDO maintain harmony among a very talented yet highly opinionated and passionate team members? Now that one I'm going to start with. I had a tremendously passionate team at Walmart when we built the Data Cafe, which won the 2014 Technology of the Year award. Each member was so passionate, they would often have debates amongst themselves of who was right. And it reminded me, I often brought back the team to a study done at AT&T Bell Labs back in the 1980s, where they gave 8 different PhDs $1 million and said, solve this problem. Each of the 8 PhDs went out and solved the problem. Some were faster, some were more expensive, but they all solved the problem. So the answer when I brought it back to the team was, listen, I'm sure as a group we can all solve this problem. Let's try to pull together in focus on the endpoint rather than the means. And as we add diversity into the picture, as each of us brings our individual inputs and thoughts into the process, we become stronger and our team becomes stronger. And we saw incredible advancements in not only the use of technology. We started using gaming software, not what it was intended to use. It was to allow remote access into a virtual data facility, this data cafe. And I answered that one. I don't know if anyone else wants to add an opinion in there. Please do.
Robert, I'd love to provide an opinion on this. I mean, I've been very privileged working in Cellarity so far, where I think 95% of my entire team come from the background or from the conference organizers from this organization. They're all MIT PhD level machine learning scientists, etc. And I think when and 2 of the people specifically in my team are authors of groundbreaking papers and code and libraries that are now used by literally the entire scientific community. So as you can imagine, are incredibly well respected globally in the work that they do. What I find interesting is we developed a culture, and this is something I picked up when I was doing a little bit of consulting between jobs. I was a special advisor to the UN Global Sustainable Development Goals. And when we had these chief sustainability officers come in for this hackathon at Cambridge University, it was interesting because we talked about the culture of teams and the culture of innovators and bringing people with bright ideas together to execute against value parameters. And in that, we came up with a method that I think works for our team so far. We call it the 5 C's. It's about being curious, insatiably curious. It's about challenging respectfully. They're all brilliant minds, as you can imagine. It's also about being courageous, because the reality is not all of your projects are going to fly, and not every initiative that we take is going to see the end life, if you will, of that project. So it's also being courageous, knowing when to kill projects as well, as much as you're encouraging projects. Last but not last but not least, one of the other areas was, this collaboration, that no one person individually, no matter how talented you are, can carry a company fully. There are teams that you have to work with, and as a result of that, recognizing the inherent biases that bring about opinions are going to be critical. So we actually have done personality tests, etc., in our organization to ensure that people understand either how you communicate information, which is 99% one of the major issues of conflict in any organization, is just improper communication, and just how people expect information. And the last one I say for us, which is very important, is charity, and it's the charitability of knowledge. No one cares if you're the smartest person in the room once you're in a corporation. What they care about is whether you can scale those capabilities across the organization. And being charitable in your knowledge is one of the most crucial pieces that, particularly when you're hiring smart folks coming from well-regarded institutions who are coming to learn, being a coach and being charitable in your knowledge is perhaps one of the #1 criteria of why people stay in these companies. But that's how we've tried to do it within our company. We haven't always gotten it right. There have been absolutely nightmarish discussions along the way, but we've tried very hard to sort of, when things go awry, to bring us back to our core values and say, look, is this really the way we want to behave in this context?
I see Andrea kind of shaking her head. Did you want to give your 2 thoughts in there?
No, I love the answer, and I think that is such a great way to approach it, and to remind people that just what you said, being the smartest person in the room means nothing if you can't get the team to work together and have a collaborative environment, because that's just a miserable environment for everyone. So I love that answer.
Yep. By the way, I just bringing up here, what percentage of organizations have implemented some of these disruptive technologies? Numbers are very low, 0 to 25%. Interestingly, we've only got a couple minutes left. I want to make sure we get to any other questions. I'm going to try to stop sharing my screen if I can. It's a little challenging. Let's see. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, Robert, I posted the newer questions on the chat here on Zoom, so check those.
Got it. There is a newer question. What are the, how do you build trust with business units to embrace data science and analytics? And who is best placed to change this culture? Who would like to take that one?
Robert, can you repeat that a moment? What was the first part?
Oh, sure. How do you build trust with business units to embrace data science and analytics? And who is best placed to change this culture? I'm actually backing up. The question started out with, the idea of how can you deal with departments trying to lock their data as being owners and not wanting to share with others? Who's best placed to change this culture? And then it moved to, how do you build trust with business units to embrace data science and analytics, and in turn share their data? So who would like to take a shot at that?
Yeah, I can go that, Robert. Yeah, so what we are doing is basically integrating our data organization within the business function. We are always there when there's a business problem, and we don't say that, this is a data problem, this is a business problem. And our CDO is part of the business organization, and any business problem, we start with, what kind of analysis or support that we can do to solve those business problems. And then we go to the data, finding the data, getting the right data, and, delivering the right data to the business to solve those business problems is critical. And engaging the business partner in all the way, from the very beginning to actually delivering the value to them, because it's not the data per se, correct? It's not the analytics models, or it's not the reports. It's like the quality and how you deliver those analytics or data to the business partners, how easy it is for them to actually use it. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, we are building a lot of underwriting models, loss models, the risk score models. How do you deliver those value and how they perceive those, analytics, in their day-to-day life, and how those are improving their day-to-day life? That matters. It's not about, what data and what algorithms that you are using to build those models.
Yeah, I'll also add in there a little bit. I have found in working inside some companies, I'll take an insurance company for an example. Underwriting was hoarding data that actuaries really needed, because actuaries had to do filings and reporting on some of the data, and the way they were deriving it in order to do the filings actually created some huge inaccuracies in what they were reporting. And we did the exact same thing. As if we went to the business, we got the business people to sit down and actually talk to each other and get them to understand that this is a business issue, it's a business problem, and that there were fines and repercussions, being caused because they were not working hand in hand the way they should be. And so it wasn't about the data, it was about the business and the business need for information. And then they were able to begin to open up, sharing data better.
Sure. And we've got another question that just came in. Do you do much with exploring the value of adding external data sources to the sources that you're currently using? I'm going to open that one up, and then I could just pass it along to everyone. One thing I found, and this is across many industries that I've been a part of as a consultant and as a CDO, is that external data sources are more and more becoming the norm into organizations, being permanently or at least brought into a staging area and then used from that as a source of information. Back, let's say 20, 30 years ago, it was 90% internal data and maybe 5 or 10% external data. That was mostly that external data wasn't integrated into your business intelligence. It was primarily things like, well, give me the Nielsen market share, or give me something that was going on. Today, it's almost flipped. It's now 80 to 90% external data and 10% internal data, unless your organization has a tremendous data actuarial function or some other function that's actually creating a large amount of data. Much of the data is coming externally. That's my observations. And anyone else want to give their thoughts on that?
I would say maybe just from the life sciences community, academic published data is crucial to advancing our knowledge of science. So it has and will continue to be, will have a very big role, certainly in the life sciences community. There are orthogonal data types that are starting to come into play, things like integrating weather patterns. Weather has an obvious effect on health. Even pollution kinds of data sources are equally important when you consider certain chronic diseases and whatnot. So I think the life sciences community is certainly opening up. The challenge for the life sciences community is that we can't even agree on the basic definition of a gene. So there are some more fundamental issues that are going on. But that said, it's important. I think what's equally important, though, is that there are papers and then there are papers. And at the risk of bringing up fake news, I think you have to have people that have expertise in some of these fields to also curate that information. In our case, we found that whilst we do incorporate a lot of external data, we also don't always believe the quality of the experimentation that was done to generate that data. So we often generate the data ourselves under conditions that we think are more appropriate for the work we do. But that's probably about 20% of work. It's not a huge.
Life sciences is unique, Milind, in that you're focused. For example, Andrea, you're in financial services. What do you see a lot of external data now? I know you're bringing in ticker information and other information into the international banking system. But do you see that as a trend?
We bring in a lot of data, different sources, especially around information about profile. So we get feeds from the State Department to understand where the rest, or we're an export-import bank. So if there's unrest, ports are going to be closed or things like that, that's information that we need to know and that we trend over time. So yes, we bring in a lot of data. And I also worked for, this is a number of years ago, large travel agency. We did travel for huge companies, Nike and Pepsi, and we would bring in data about both civil unrest, weather, and health risks, so that we could then text or call those travelers for those different businesses to let them know that we need to get them out of there, things like that.
Yeah, Andrea, you've been breaking up somewhat, but Andrea's answer was yes, there is a number of different data sources that she's bringing in externally. Asif, you're in insurance. Maybe you want to give me your thoughts on the insurance industry.
Oh yeah, no, insurance is very big on the third-party data. We actually, as you know, our Hartford Steam Boiler is part of Munich Re. It's like a global giant in the insurance and reinsurance business. You know, we actually buy a lot of third-party data, and actually many times it was part of innovation. But of late, we are really focusing on measuring how much lift those third-party data are providing to our business. You know, and surprisingly, not surprisingly, like Munich Re has actually built a third-party data hunting team called, they call data hunting team, and they globally look for different third-party data and test third-party data with different businesses. Because in the past, what was happening were different groups in Munich Re was buying the same data and paying many different version of that same data and paying for it. Now we have a central procurement system, central data hunting unit, looking for many different third-party data from, the videos, from the pictures, text, credit data, weather data, it's like, you name it. There are, telematics data, there are a lot of data available in the P&C industry, that insurance industry are actually augmenting and enriching and making use to better pricing models, better serve the customer, and also like there are other third-party data that is popping up on an everyday basis.
We at when we were building the data cafe at Walmart, we brought in weather, we brought in real-time traffic, we brought in a number of sources that nobody had ever considered when you in the sales process, so that they could look at on Black Friday the trends of purchases on the East Coast in real time, and then be able to change the distribution in the Western Mountain and in turn the West Coast time zones. We're almost to the end here. Last question: what are the top 3 mistakes that CDOs make, which leads to their failures? 3 minutes to go.
I'm happy to offer a chat there. I mean, I'll tell you what, I think it depends what you're brought in as a role for. There's many organizations who have brought in CDOs because they believe they need to, but are not sure exactly why, let alone what their remit is. And if it is to induce change or be a catalyst, as I was in some of the roles, you've got to expect that I would have a very short tenure. We will leave a lot of dead bodies along the road as well, because your mission there is to be a change catalyst. So pissing off people is part of the job, frankly. And then you create a path so that you've defrosted part of the permafrost of middle management so that people can get the job done in data. But that's just one example, but certainly something that I've experienced in the past with no regrets.
I'll just add my thoughts on it. And I think that, CDOs needs to be really focused on the business. Many times I've seen that sometimes it's become technology focused, and we have to remember technology is good, but it needs to add value to the business in an incremental manner. And it's not the technology, it's the business. As long as you remember that on a daily basis, I think we'll be successful.
Good. And Martha, get in your last 30-second response.
Yeah, I kind of agree that you'd really need to understand why the role was created within the organization. And I think a lot of the reason why CDOs have turned over so much in the last 2 years has been because they're brought in as a change agent, because getting companies to become data-driven requires cultural change. Data literacy and data governance within itself is a change agent, right? And so CDOs are typically turned over within 2 years per company, and that's just to be expected. It used to be CIOs went through that, right? Now CIOs are much more stable in their positions, and CDOs are turning over. And I think that's going to continue probably for the next 10 years.
Well, let's give Andrea 30 seconds. Andrea, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with what everybody said. I think it is such a change culture that it really is a lot of marketing and out there partnering with business in order to really show to them that you're there to enable their data and manage data better, and stay away from the technology discussions, because that's not gonna, that's not what the role is.
Thank you.
All right. Robert?
Yes.
Thank you all very much for this very informative session. Great panel. And appreciate the time that you've dedicated to furthering the cause for the MIT CDOIQ Symposium.